June 6, 1944, Operation Overlord. Thousands of Americans and English armored vehicles must land in Normandy. The liberation of Europe is underway. The goal, Berlin, and definitively to contradict Hitler's words that the Third Reich would last 1,000 years. On the other side, even though the Germans are showing signs of fatigue after 4.5 years of fighting, their tanks have never been so powerful, so technologically advanced. But is that enough to thwart the Allied Armada? Nothing is less sure.
Tanks are the most perfect representation of the nation that built them.
Today, tanks are at the heart of terrestrial conflicts, and no one disputes their central place in global offensive and defensive strategies. But how were they used 80 years ago? What were they capable of? And above all, how did engineers manage to design them, modernize them, and adapt them to increasingly demanding technological constraints and requirements? With the support of often unpublished archives, the three-dimensional modeling of vehicles that have disappeared, and the testimonies of experts in armored vehicles, we will explore the fate of an incredible war weapon, the tank. Tank tech, a total immersion in the great evolution of a war machine. The night of June 5th to 6th, 1944, 7,000 Allied warships crossed the Channel for the largest human and material landing ever in military history. 4 years to the day after the debacle of the Franco-English troops, France is once again preparing to be at the scene of battles of extraordinary intensity. The landing targets, 5 beaches on the Normandy coast: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. From there, Allied troops will have to scale up their advance and secure deep-water ports before heading east. In the holds of the landing ship tanks, boats especially designed for such amphibious operations have been loaded with artillery pieces, many jeeps, and several hundred tanks. Among them, the spearhead of the Allied armored units, the M4 Sherman. The Sherman is a medium infantry tank, measuring almost 6 meters long by 2.60 meters wide. In the hull, it has a 50mm armor in the front, 38mm on the sides, and in the turret, 75mm armor. It can reach a speed of 48 kilometers per hour on the road, thanks to a 375 horsepower V12 diesel engine. It's equipped with a 75mm cannon and 3 machine guns, one coaxial, one at the top of the turret, and one mounted on ball joints at the front of the hull. It weighs almost 30 tons and carries 5 crew members. Production, around 50,000 units.
The Sherman tank is the appropriate American answer to the 1940 disaster in France. For them, it's going to be a tank that really meets the needs on the ground, since it's a tank which is able to face the German tanks of 1942 without too much difficulty, as it will be obvious from their first encounters in North Africa. But this tank can also be produced very quickly, very simply, and in numbers that a power like Germany can only dream about. You have a production ratio between the Sherman and the German tanks, which are about 1 to 10 or 1 to 15, because the Americans are the kings of standardization to the excess.
Another major vehicle used by the Allied troops, the tank destroyer M10. This tank, specializing in anti-tank warfare, shares the chassis and the running gear of the Sherman M4A2, but the top of the body is modified. The armor is lightened and does not exceed 57mm in turret. This loss is compensated by the steep slope of the panel, which tends to make the penetration of the shells more complicated. The open-air turret accommodates 2 of the 5 crew members and a 76.2mm gun. It's equipped with a 375 horsepower engine. Behind the beaches, in the Caen area, the 21st Panzer Division is on guarding duty. It counts among its troops many Panzer IV, a legendary tank, faithful from the first hour, produced in 9,000 copies during the entire Second World War. Designed in the mid-1930s, the Panzer IV began its career during the campaign of Poland in 1939 and has been in every fight since then. Initially imagined as a support tank, it has gradually established itself thanks to major transformations as the main battle tank. Initially, the Panzer IV was equipped with a short 75mm, whose explosive shells were effective against infantry and fortified positions. It had unified armor of 14.5mm and weighed 18 tons. Several versions have followed since its encounters with the powerful French and Soviet tanks. The 1942 AUF-G weighs over 23 tons, has an armor that goes up to 50mm, and a long-tube anti-tank gun and high-velocity shells. The AUF-H model rolls off production lines from April 1944 and will be the most produced model of all. It weighs 25 tons, has 80mm reinforced armor at the front, and features protective track skirts. For better range, the tube of the KWK-40 75mm gun has been lengthened even more. But in June 1944, the shortage of raw materials increasingly handicaps the German military industry. Elements of the Panzer IV are sacrificed. It loses a carrier roller, and its turret now pivots manually and no longer electrically. German industry stalls, and the Panzer IV follows suit. Throughout the war, the engineers of the Reich knew how to deal with the challenge, find solutions to constantly push their technological limits, and adapt their tanks to the evolution of the type of war being waged. From an offensive posture, the Panzers gradually took on a defensive posture. To give themselves a maximum chance of success, the Allies have mounted the largest military disinformation campaign ever, Operation Fortitude.
The objective of Fortitude is to make sure that the 15th German Army stays in Pas-de-Calais. It is fundamental that the 15th German Army does not descend into Normandy, otherwise everything will be lost. Landing would be impossible.
And to deceive the Wehrmacht, the Allies enrolled the prestigious General Patton, leader of a phantom army, and cinema technicians in order to build fake tanks, the dummies.
To deceive the Germans, the Allies do not hesitate to manufacture thousands of false inflatable rubber tanks, which will be exhibited on the British coast in front of the Pas-de-Calais, in full view of the Germans, and in particular in sight of the German reconnaissance planes, so that the Germans continue to believe that the landing will take place in the Pas-de-Calais.
Operation Overlord is something unique, and nothing similar has ever been reproduced in terms of secrecy, in terms of planning, and in terms of details and fine-tuning to ensure the success of this landing.
Thanks to intelligence gathered by the French resistance and to the intensive aerial reconnaissance, we can say that the Allies knew to the meter where all the obstacles built by the Germans on the Atlantic Wall were to be found.
The Allied armored vehicles will therefore have to cross this Atlantic Wall, a formidable coastal fortification system erected from northern Norway to the Pyrenees. On the beach, at the foot of the cliffs and on the concrete walls, stand a wide range of anti-tank obstacles such as Belgian gates, Czech hedgehogs, or the many mines mounted on piles. Above, overlooking the beach and the horizon, are impressive artillery batteries capable of pulverizing anything. And behind all that, lands have been flooded to hinder any form of progression. The Allies have perfectly identified this defensive system thanks to numerous aerial reconnaissance missions, but they also have hands-on experience since the raid on Dieppe 2 years earlier. In August 1942 at Dieppe, Anglo-Canadian forces attempted to land alongside their infantry the newest British assault tanks, the Churchill. The Churchill is an easily identifiable infantry tank thanks to its 11 rollers. It weighs 40 tons, is 7.60 meters long, and more than 3 meters wide. Intended for infantry support, it has 76mm thick armor on the sides and 102mm on the front. It is armed with a 40mm anti-tank gun with a practical range of 900mm. On board, 5 crew members and a 350 horsepower engine that propels it at 27 kilometers an hour. But during the raid on Dieppe, nothing went quite as planned. Loaded aboard loading tank craft, the small amphibious boats used to unload the tanks directly on the beach, the Churchill could not avoid contact with the water. In total, out of the 29 tanks that landed, 2 sank and 12 got stuck in the pebbles. Some managed to clear the obstacles before being stopped by an anti-tank wall several dozen centimeters high. A fiasco and a massacre. 1,200 Canadian soldiers were killed in action. 3,000 were imprisoned by the Germans. For its first outing, the Churchill had it rough, but it was very enlightening.
Very quickly, the British general Percy Hobart was commissioned to design special devices capable of destroying or helping the Dassault infantry to cross all the obstacles of the Atlantic Wall. These devices were very quickly baptized drôleries in French, or funnies, and the General Hobart's 79th Armored Division was also very quickly named the General Hobart's Menagerie.
To successfully float a 30-ton craft, engineers fitted the Sherman with a waterproof rubber skirt that rises through tubes inflated with air. The DD tank for duplex drive was born. Apart from the driver who is inside, the other 4 crew members position themselves on the roof of the tank behind the walls, from where the commander can steer using a steering bar. And thanks to the 2 propellers located at the rear and powered by the same undercarriage as that of the tracks, the Sherman manages to start moving. Once in the water, it looks like any other boat. It can move at a speed of 4 knots or about 8 kilometers per hour. Its freeboard of 1.20 meters allows it to withstand winds of force 3, so waves around 30 centimeters. If the waves are higher, it takes water and sinks. As soon as it climbs onto the shore and drops its skirt, the armored vehicle becomes ready to fight, together with the first infantry to land. This clever creation is known as the DD duplex drive. In the event of an incident, tankers have 7 minutes to extricate themselves from the tanks and return to the surface using an autonomous breathing system. To get rid of the mines laid on the beaches, some Allied tanks are equipped with a rotating cylinder to which are attached 40 weighted chains. The motor of the tank drives the rotation of the flail, making it reach 142 revolutions per minute. By violently whipping the ground, these chains detonate both anti-personnel and anti-tank mines. Thanks to the flexibility of the arms to which the rotor is attached, the armor does not absorb the power of the blast. This tank is the Sherman Crab, the perfect partner to another incredible funny. The Churchill's anti-tank gun was replaced by a lug mortar with 290mm self-propelling ammunition, which weighed 18 kilograms and contained napalm. The Churchill AVRE can destroy all and any fortifications. The projectile can blow up a resistance nest from about 120 meters away, the width of a Normandy beach. This Churchill also serves as a basis to accommodate all other specific equipment, such as this reinforced canvas spool which unwinds under its tracks. It makes it possible to mark a path for the following vehicle through the barbed wire, wet sand, or clay soils. Once the roll is finished, the frame is abandoned by its crew. This funny is the Churchill AVRE bobbin. To cross the parapets, the Churchill Ark abandons its turret in favor of extendable ramps on which other tanks can rest. Everything seems to have been thought of. Another Churchill, the Fascine, can take on board a huge bundle of wood of 3 meters in diameter, which it deposits in anti-tank ditches dug behind the fortified lines in order to fill in and then cross them.
Within
Within the Allied HQ, there was obviously a lot of tactical discussion about how to use the Hobart funnies. And quite naturally, the British offered the Americans to lend them part of General Hobart's fleet. But the Americans had an approach to the landing which was a little different from that of the British, in that they had a firm belief that naval and aerial bombardments would overcome the Atlantic Wall, and that ultimately, the infantry that would land on the beaches would have very little to neutralize and would be naturally and quickly carried towards the interior of the lands. Despite all this, and as a precaution, the Americans did agree to land some Sherman duplex drive and some bulldozer tanks on the Omaha and Utah beaches.
June 6, 1944, 6 a.m. The day rises under a deluge of fire of extraordinary intensity. From the boats, from the air, shells rain down on the German positions. But the weather is catastrophic. The sea is raging. As the boats approach Omaha Beach, the D.D. Shermans prepare for battle. 5 kilometers from the coast, the ramps of the boats lower and the tanks slide into the waves. The goal is to reach the beach before the first wave of infantry. But the DDs had been tested on the lakes of southern England. In calm and tranquil waters, they can navigate the 30-centimeter hollows. On June 6th, the waves reach almost a meter. Submerged, most sank in the instant that they were released into the sea. 27 of the 29 DDs of the 43rd Tank Battalion launched that day were swallowed up by the waves. On Omaha Beach, where the DDs were to intervene in support of the 1st Infantry Division, the famous Big Red One, it's a massacre. The first wave loses 90% of its workforce. Without any form of protection, the men fall under the bullets and the shells coming from the line of German fortifications that the Allied Air Force was unable to destroy. These scenes recall the battlefields of the Great War and the reasons why armies equipped themselves with armored weapons. Without armor, launched under heavy fire, the infantrymen are nothing but cannon fodder. But in some places, in the midst of this indescribable chaos, some tanks manage to make their way and provide considerable support. On the British beach of Gold, the Crab manages to blow up the mines and opens a way for the Churchill Havre, who silences the guns of the German pillboxes. The new assault waves that reach Sword Beach can thank the Hobart funnies that can be seen in the distance, but also this Sherman deep wading, equipped with chimneys at the back of the vehicle to brave the last waves of the shore, but which areas of quicksand have absorbed like a piece of straw. On the beach, the aftermath of fierce fighting. One after the other, the German positions fall silent. At 2 p.m., 7.5 hours after the landing of the first troops, the 5 beaches are conquered. No time to heal men's wounds or repair damaged vehicles. New waves are landing. 1,550 Allied tanks land in Normandy on this day of June 6, 1944. After having been the epicenter of heavy fighting, the beaches are cleaned by bulldozers especially designed to clear carcasses, fill rocket craters, and cover some bunkers. Kilometers of shoreline will be the scene of extraordinary logistical maneuvers. Among all this equipment that extends as far as the eye can see, many tools and an endless supply of spare parts to support the armored vehicles to the end, so that they never lack anything. Now the Allies want to secure the bridgeheads by using the speed of their tanks. But the Normandy countryside has many surprises in store, and the tanks quickly find themselves plunged into what the GIs would soon call the hell of the hedges.
Immediately after landing, the Allies discover, if I may say so, the Norman Bocage, which is in fact a natural system of fortifications and camouflage whose characteristics are so particular that it will be very problematic for the progress of the Allies in Normandy.
This natural fortification is a nightmare for the attackers. The tall earthen banks and thick plant walls provide an ideal hideout for Wehrmacht snipers, in addition to providing a terrible bulwark against the penetrating force of the Allied armor. Hidden in the foliage, the infantryman waits for a tank to appear before him, whose armor will not withstand the hit of his formidable Panzerschreck.
In fact, when an Allied tank wants to cross one of the hedges of the Norman bocage, it finds itself confronted with several difficulties. The first is that the hedges are very thick, and that they are very rooted in the ground, and that ultimately they are not that easy to crush, even for a tank. When the tank does, he finds himself with his nose in the air, dangerously exposing his floor, which is actually the most vulnerable part of the tank's hull, and which the Germans had obviously learned to aim at before anything else.
Every problem has its solution. To flush out the enemy, General Hobart has a funny in his pocket that will do just fine: the Churchill Crocodile flamethrower. Here, the machine gun at the front of the hull has been replaced by a flamethrower. And for added safety for the tankers, the 1,800 liters of flammable liquid are located in the tanks of a trailer towed by the tank, which can be dropped at any time in the event of an enemy attack. The liquid reaches the launcher through an armored pipe running under the tank and into the cockpit. The launcher has a range of 110 to 140 meters, and the operator has a choice. He can spray bursts of flaming fuel or spray the target with liquid and set it on fire only after. The psychological impact on the enemy is considerable, and the mere sight of this tank is often enough to force the infantrymen out of their burrows. For the Germans, it is the main enemy to be defeated. From now on, they have to manage to cross the hedges. This time, the solution will not come from a funny, but from an ingenious American soldier.
A shrewd sergeant of the American Army named Cullen had the idea of recovering on the Normandy beaches the steel frieze horses that the Germans had deposited on the beaches to prevent the landing of the tanks. With an army of welders, he sets about cutting up those frieze horses and transforming them into hedge cutters. These hedge cutters are fixed in front of the tanks in the lowest part, so that when a tank wants to cross a hedge in the bocage, it cuts and shears the hedges directly and therefore can cross them and access the fields that lie behind.
500 American tanks are equipped with these steel jaws, which give them the name of hedge cutter and of rhino tank. In the wake of the large breaches they create, infantry and other vehicles can now follow. If solutions have been found to achieve a breakthrough in the Norman bocage, others will be needed to face the formidable panzers. In Normandy, the armor-piercing shells of the Panzer IV are wreaking havoc, and the Wehrmacht also imposes those of some variants of this legendary model, so to speak, their own funnies. The Panzer IV assault gun consists of a 100mm armored case mat mounted on a Panzer IV chassis. It carries a powerful 150mm rocket launcher that fires both explosive and armor-piercing shells, an ideal machine for fire and infantry support missions in the bocage or in urban areas. The Sturmgeschütz IV, or Stug IV, both assault gun and tank destroyer, is the solution to support the legendary and versatile Stug III, whose production has ceased due to the destruction of the assembly factories by Allied bombardments. But the true tank destroyer version of the Panzer IV is none other than the Jagdpanzer IV. It takes over the hull of the tank, but modifies a number of elements to give it such a low and streamlined silhouette. The front is sharper, and the sloping walls of the superstructure increase the protection of this armored tank to 60mm from the front and 30mm from the side. With its PaK-39 75mm anti-tank gun, it can pierce 77mm armor at a distance of 1,500 meters. This armored vehicle weighs 24 tons. It's powered by a 300 horsepower Maybach engine that speeds it up to 40 kilometers per hour on the road. To survive the deadly fire of their enemies, the Allied tankers are reinforcing their tanks with sandbags, cement, tree trunks, and even worn-out tank tracks. Little protection. because the latest creations of the engineers of the Reich are formidably effective. The Panther is a 45-ton beast that took the concept of a very tilted panel from the T-34. It's equipped with a large armor of 80 millimeters on the front hull and 100 millimeters in the turret. It has a more powerful engine than the Panzer IV, a Maybach 700 horsepower, giving it a speed of 55 kilometers per hour. Like the Sherman, it's equipped with a 75 millimeter gun, but the resemblance ends there. At a distance of 1,500 meters, the German Panzer perforates a 100 millimeter armor, where the American M61 projectile penetrates only a 55 millimeter armor. If the Sherman wants to menace the Panther, it must take the risk of approaching within 500 meters and aiming at his flanks, which are less well armored. 432 units of this tank are present in Normandy. The other major creation of the Wehrmacht's armored department is the iconic Tiger tank. Designed to outsmart the mighty KV-1, it dominates the entire German armored fleet. It is perfectly recognizable by its angular silhouette and strong lines. It weighs 57 tons, has a 690 horsepower engine, and 80 millimeter lateral armor, 100 millimeter at the front of the turret, and 120 millimeters at the gun manlet. Its main weapon is a KWK 36 88 millimeter cannon, capable of firing 10 rounds per minute at an initial speed of 930 meters per second and at a maximum distance of 10 kilometers. Much better than any gun in the American armored arsenal. By creating these tanks, Hitler's engineers are imposing a new standard of armored power to the Allies. It will usually take 5 Sherman tanks to defeat 1 Tiger. But there are only 150 Tiger tanks in Normandy, compared to 8,000 Allied tanks. Numbers outweigh individual power, all the more since the Tiger remains a fragile piece of machinery. The Allies are struggling to keep up with the firepower of the enemy tanks. They take the blows. During these battles, the all-new British Cromwell tanks are easily destroyed over and over. Weighing 25 tons, the Allies are struggling, even more so since the Germans, despite increasingly severe constraints, are producing and launching their new models of tanks and tank destroyers. The 3000 M10 Achilles, the Sherman Fireflies, and the armada of Sherman and Churchill tanks failed to be decisive. In the end, aviation will make the difference. In the skies of Europe, the infernal sirens of the Stukas have given way to the sound of the legendary Thunderbolt, Mustang, and Typhoons. Those planes hunt armored vehicles and supply trains and target them with powerful 127 or 144 millimeter anti-tank rockets.
This is the direct consequence of the American doctrine, which is that a war is not won with tanks, even if you have good tanks. You do not need to have extraordinary technological superiority. War is won by air superiority, by mastery of the skies. It is won by infallible logistics, which means that, whatever the conditions, the troops at the front will be supplied. It is won by intelligence, and it is won by firepower. It is true that when it comes to firepower, the American artillery is really something. But for the Americans, the tanks were never considered a factor of absolute operational superiority, which they had to master.
American B-26 bombers plunge into the land in search of railway junctions and of ammunition and supply warehouses, which they cover with bombs. These are the strategic bombing operations. The Allied squadrons even went as far as destroying the last oil refineries of the Reich. The Panzers are starting to run out of fuel. Some German armored vehicles escaped the aerial bombings, but without supplies, without spare parts, they were breaking down. The crews destroyed and abandoned them. However, Reich engineers believe they already have a solution.
This solution will be the creation and development of the Tiger II, or Royal Tiger, which is in fact a Super Tiger, a slightly heavier Tiger with a much thicker armor, but which still has the dreaded 88 millimeter gun of the Tiger.
The Tiger II is the most powerful armored vehicle designed during the war. It is a tank of almost 70 tons, 27 tons more than a Panther, heavier than a current Leclerc tank. 7 meters 62 long and 3 meters 75 wide, it has rear and side armors of 80 millimeters and a front armor which can reach 185 millimeters in turret. This had never been seen before. It's equipped with the Maybach HL230 P30 12-cylinder engine, developing 700 horsepower, which allows it to barely reach 35 kilometers per hour on the road for a consumption of 500 liters per 100 kilometers. Equipped with a KWK-43 88mm cannon, whose tube protrudes by more than 1 theater than that of the Tiger, 6 meters long in total, and able to pulverize the 150 millimeters of armor of the Sherman Jumbo from 1,500 meters away. Number of units produced, 492, including 50 units with the Krupp turret designed for the model built by Porsche. But the Koenigsegger consumes 500 liters per 100 kilometers, while the Wehrmacht has run out of fuel. A width and height which prevents it from passing many bridges and makes it a bit immobile, a fragile gearbox, and some tracks that must be changed to load it on wagons. Contrary to what these propaganda images want to convey, the Royal Tiger is and will be of little tactical use. Even more so as Allied bombardments destroy factories one after the other. The Wehrmacht will never have the 1,500 Koenigstigers planned in the original order. With the power cord cut, the Panzer counterattacks fail and the Wehrmacht inevitably retreats, crossing back towards the Rhine. From now on, they must defend the fatherland, the mother country, which does not prevent Adolf Hitler from dreaming of a final counteroffensive.
At the end of 1944, Hitler wants to replay his trick from the Ardennes in 1940, but this time at the pivotal period between autumn and winter, and he will want to use the last tanks that rolled out of the factories, the Royal Tiger tanks, the Koenigsstinger in particular, the last models of Panther, thinking that, once again, a surprise attack through this mountainous forest, which was successful 4 years before, will be once again a success.
December 1944. The Führer, taking advantage of the terrible weather which prevents any air support operation, launches his last reserves in the Ardennes. Among the armored forces of the Reich, a monster, the tank destroyer Jagdpanther, whose production had only started 10 months earlier in January 1944. The Jagdpanther had been preceded by 2 attempts to mount an 88mm gun as a self-propelled anti-tank weapon. The result? The far too heavy Ferdinand, using a 91 Porsche VK 45.01 chassis designed in 1942 for Tiger tanks. And the Nashorn, lightly armored and underpowered, using Panzer III or IV chassis. The Jagdpanther is significantly better than its predecessors. 12 of them will serve in Normandy, where they face the new American M36 Jackson tank destroyers, which have landed in Europe in September 1944. The German fighter is longer and wider than the Jackson, and with 45 tons against 29 on the scale, it's also heavier. The Jagdpanther features a 700 horsepower MAN V12 engine that gives it a road speed of 55 kilometers an hour, whereas the Jackson only has a 450 horsepower Ford engine and can only reach a speed of 42 kilometers per hour. It also benefits from better armor, 80 millimeters at the front, 100 at the gun mantlet, while the American model only presents 36 and 76 meters. The M36 has a 90mm anti-tank gun capable of piercing 95 millimeters of armor from 1 kilometer away, which is already not bad. But its German counterpart is equipped with an 88 caliber PaK-43, capable of piercing 165 millimeters of armor at the same distance, which is even better. On paper, the Jagdpanther wins the duel hands down, although the Jackson, with its 360-degree turret, can more easily get into firing position. 415 Jagdpanther will be produced against 1,400 M36, 3-1. The Americans therefore have won the battle of production once again.
We identify 2 major periods in the history of the Panzerwaffe. The first period, which goes from 41 to 43, is the period of the resolutely offensive posture, and during this period, the Panzerwaffe does not put in service any tank destroyer. From 43 and the Battle of Kursk, the Panzerwaffe returned to a resolutely defensive posture and needed to slow down the Russian army.
Et là, l'industrie
And
allemande,
then, the German industry began to develop and manufacture tank destroyers.
le
The Jagged Panther, which is therefore the tank destroyer version of the Panther tank, and if I may say so, a natural technical evolution for the Germans, since each German model of tank has been the subject of a tank destroyer derivative.
d'un dérivé.
This is how we find Jagged Panzer IV and Jagged Panzer III. We will later find Jagged Tiger and even Jagged Koenigsegger. That is to say, a tank destroyer based on the Royal Tiger or the Tiger II.
If the German tank destroyers have the tools to reign in the hell of the Ardennes, the fate of the Wehrmacht plays out elsewhere.
The action of the American tanks and the counterattack of the 3rd Patton Army will play a determining role by posing a threat to the southern flank of the German advance towards the west and towards the Meuse. And finally saved, I would say, the 101st Airborne, which resists against all odds in Bastogne. And Patton becomes a legend because he is stopped on the side of the road to address a Christmas prayer to the good Lord, asking not only for the ability to move fast, but above all for a clear sky, which is the most decisive element to support the tanks, because it allows the Allied Air Force to come ahead of the armored vehicles and to open a road for them in the German defenses.
It was also in the Ardennes that 2 units of a model intended to replace the M5 Stuart light tank were used for the first time, the M24 Chaffee, whose crews appreciated its all-terrain qualities, its mechanical reliability, and its 75mm gun, which was much more efficient than the 37mm of the Stuart. But above all, this weaponry gives it the opportunity to be able to retreat, because the M24 is unable to fight the latest German tank models. In addition, its weak armor makes it vulnerable to all rocket launchers. Having arrived on the front too late and too few to effectively replace the M5 Stuart, the M24 will hardly contribute to the final victory.
Et ça, c'est une autre caractéristique de la méthode américaine.
And that is another characteristic of the American method, which continues to this day.
Ils sortent.
They release a first generation of tanks or a first version of tanks, and then gradually, as technologies become available and as the industrial capacity grows in power, as better equipment becomes available to them, they integrate all that and they progress step by step towards better versions, towards more efficient versions. And it is true that the last version of the American tank, the M48, is a tank which is already much heavier than the first version. It has a diesel engine. It has a reinforced running gear. Its gun is much more powerful, and they fire armor-piercing shells which are capable of destroying the Panthers. So we see this American method of continuous improvement made possible by very specific methods of development and of qualification, and also by the flexibility of its industry, which is capable of adapting.
During the battles in Normandy and of the Ardennes, tankers in American armored divisions have learned the hard way that a tanker does not choose his opponent. The old doctrine that a tank should accompany the infantry and not fight other tanks, giving this job to the tank destroyers and to the Air Force, turned out to be absolute nonsense. First, because the tank destroyers had not been remarkably efficient, and then because the M4 Sherman had discovered that it had little chance of survival against German tanks and heavy tank destroyers. It needed replacement urgency, the M26 Pershing. This new armored vehicle is a heavy tank. It is 6.33 meters long and 3.51 meters wide. It weighs nearly 42 tons and has a 500 horsepower Ford engine that propels it at a speed of 40 kilometers an hour on the road, 8 kilometers an hour off-road. At the request of the tankers, its armor was increased to 102 millimeters in front, 114 millimeters in the turret, and 76 millimeters on the sides. The M26 is better armored, but it is not better armed. Its 90mm gun is less powerful than the English 17-pounder ordnance of the Sherman Firefly and the 88mm of the Tiger II.
Although the M4 Sherman made up the bulk of the American armored divisions, the Americans nevertheless gave in to the heavy tank fashion. and they study and develop the Pershing tank, which ultimately wants to be somewhat of an anti-Panther. That is to say that the tank, which is capable of destroying a Panther tank or even a Tiger tank, while being itself immune to its blows.
Rolling through the ruins of the Reich, the Sherman crews, so vulnerable to attack by powerful German armor, could reflect on the irony of history. They might be facing the most advanced mechanics ever, benefiting from incredible technological advances. It was still the American Sherman and the Soviet T-34 that would forever remain the tanks of victory. What the tracks of their armored vehicles trampled were neither more nor less than the Nazi production apparatus, wiped out by Allied Air Force bombs. There's no point in having the best tank in the world if you don't have the spare parts to fix it, the fuel to run it, the ammo to make it fight, nor an experienced crew to drive it. At the end of the war, the Panzer crews were made up of teenagers who had never known the harshness of fighting. What could they do? In the cruel game of war, the Allied armored vehicles also profited greatly from the law of numbers. While the German factories produced a little more than 49,000 armored vehicles between 1940 and 1945, including more than 15,000 Panzer IIIs and 6,500 Panthers, the English, American, and Russian workers, men and women, produced more than 270,000 units. Between 1941 and 45, the Soviet Union alone produced 100,000 tanks, including 60,000 T-34s. Intoxicating numbers. To any German tank, the Allies could put up more than 5 tanks. The game was won in advance. Events proved a certain Colonel de Gaulle to be right. He who had said on May 21, 1940, from his headquarters in Savigny-sur-Indre, "Mechanical warfare began on May 10th. In the air and on land, the mechanical devices, airplanes or tanks, are the main element of force. The enemy has gained an initial advantage over us. Why? Only because he has applied this truth earlier and more fully than us. Its successes come from its armored divisions and from its air force, from nothing else. Well, our successes of tomorrow and our victory, yes, our victory, will one day come from our armored divisions and our air force." The loop seems to have come full circle, and while never calling into question the courage and the sense of sacrifice over the armored crews of all the nations engaged in this war of giants, it is also in the factories that the greatest tank conflict in history was won.